And I thought I had no trauma, right? I feel like I thought this was normal. My body was screaming at me to do something about it. I just
Mm.
was not listening for a long time. I think it's so important because I think this is the basis of like why we always suffer from central traumas and things. And I've realized I have so many more, like whether you want to call it traumas, I don't know, but these events that are sort of stuck and going around in my mind, the experiences that we've gone through life can depend on how many open loops I guess we have. But for the fact that I felt like I grieved for 10 years, I was not closing any loops. Especially trauma is one of those things that you really don't want to be reliving. You do not want to talk about it in a sense that you're bringing it up and just leaving those loops open and open. And I feel like I'm having that freedom of mind. Hi, and welcome to episode 2 of this podcast we started making. I'm Pip, and this is Tim, my lovely partner. And it's about grief and emotional loss, and a very difficult topic, I think, for a lot of people. And I decided I wanted to share my story about my own losses in life, and I especially when loss hit me big time about 12, 13 years ago, as I realized last time. Probably about 13 years ago now, isn't it? Where I lost my best friend. And that was incredibly traumatic for me. So if you've not checked out episode 1, where we talked about, why grief is essentially what feels like my entire life, then yeah, go and check that episode out. Any sort of thoughts from last episode that you actually remember? We were just reflecting on this, that we were like, it's so hard to remember what we did about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, when we did all this sort
Mostly
of stuff.
discussing the loss of friends and family in our past that have affected us emotionally and how we're trying to sort of overcome it or trying to get through it.
Yeah, and I spent what I always reflect on like the last, good 10 years sort of grieving my friend. And then I think I've spent the last 2 to 3 years kind of feeling like I've actually started to emotionally heal from it, from all the stuff I've been doing. And the methods I found recently have just been so transformative that I wouldn't say like I'm healed or anything, to the point at which like I don't suffer from all these things. But I think the methods and stuff I found, that I've written a course, I've done an online course about because I wanted to share with more people, or I want to work one on one with people. It's like it's just so important, like the information, and we're going to sort of talk. We're going to talk about a topic I call like opening and closing loops. And Tim, I have explained this to you a bit. In fact, we probably had many conversations about it, but I think maybe not in so much clarity. So I'm sort of thinking like if I can try and explain it to you, then hopefully the clarity might come across a bit better. Yeah. What do you think?
I'm going to ask what the viewers are probably thinking right now. What are opening and closing loops?
Okay, so this is about like, so again, this is about finding closure. So I kind of think of it as, and I'm going to use the word trauma, and trauma is one of those words that's kind of been thrown around quite a lot, especially like at the moment. And they talk about like little t trauma and big T trauma as we kind of understand it. Maybe big T trauma is something that you kind of more really obviously notice as trauma. Maybe you had an accident, or you're suffering from flashbacks, or something major's happened in your life. And little T trauma, I guess, is something where it's almost like I mean, you might not even know that you suffer from trauma because it's this the events were smaller, or there's maybe lots of little events you didn't realize were kind of compounding together.
Mm.
um I wasn't intending to talk about trauma, but it kind of does relate to trauma, and grief does sort of relate to this a lot. And it does not the only way to describe it. Like I think maybe you could call it like extreme stress. But anything I would say that's uh like they talk about with big T trauma like flashbacks. And I feel like I was having, and I would say like actually maybe it's just memory. So I'm just going to talk about my understanding of it because I'm not a doctor. I can only reflect on the stuff I've learned by reading, and researching and stuff myself. So and my own experiences. So This is not like medical advice or medical information or stuff like that, but just my own experience of how I feel about trauma is the fact that, like, if you have memories that come up for you, good or bad, the good memories, you kind of reflect on going, well, that's a happy memory.
Mm.
I'm okay with remembering happy stuff.
Yeah.
But if you've got a negative memory that keeps coming up for you, and it's kind of like almost like it happened yesterday, but it's a minor little argument you had, it's not significant, it's just something that's been bothering you.
Hmm.
I would still call that trauma
Yeah.
because it's bothering you. And the ones that are obvious, like the nightmares, the big flashbacks, that's big trauma. Um, and so, and I'm not going to go into detail, hopefully, about any sort of particular traumatic events. This isn't hopefully something that is an episode that's talking about anything in those sorts of terms. But it's just relating to the fact that so let's maybe talk about in sort of like major stresses. So if you've had a stressful event, so let's say an argument, and that argument didn't get resolved, you didn't find closure for that argument, and it was bothering you, and you kind of let's say it was with a partner or somebody, and that little argument's just sort of sitting there, and you're thinking, I resent them for that thing. I would say that's an open loop. I'd say that's a thing that's been opened. And in order to find closure, you want to close that loop
Mm.
in order to resolve it and move on. And I remember, because this is when we were talking about in the last episode about the whole telephone thing,
Yeah.
about if someone phones you up, or on the TV shows we were talking
Yeah.
about. In fact, I actually heard, I was at the uh, going climbing the other day, and the person on reception, the same phone call ring from 24. Do you remember what it was? I did not remember until I heard it. And I was like, oh my God. I can't really mimic it. It's like quite,
I don't remember what it was, so I have no idea. I
like,
need to Google
no, I
that
can't
later.
quite, yeah, I'm not very good at sort of mimicking stuff like that. But yes, it's like these open and closing loops. Um, so does that make sense to you? What do you think to that explanation at the moment?
Yes, you might need to go into a bit more detail, but it makes sense.
So what detail would help with what's like, um,
Uh, I don't know. It's hard to, I guess, trying to remember everything, but obviously, there's definitely, like you said, little details that there are tiny things that could have been related to trauma, but because they were so small, you don't actually notice if it's a relation or if it's taking you to a place that you don't want to be.
So let's have a think about a conversation. Let's say with a parent of yours or anyone. I don't know. I don't mind whoever, a family member or a friend, where you still have some memory of, and it was a minor event, um, and you still have some memory of that conversation.
That's the thing. I can't always. It's hard to remember because I'm trying to pinpoint something to not realizing that that was in my childhood is
I'm not talking about childhood.
you talking about any time.
Yeah, anytime. Could be recent if recent helps.
Well, I guess using I generally don't know. It's hard to it's generally harder to pinpoint something.
When I put Tim on the spot, he like
Panics.
anxiety creeps in. Okay. All right, ask me the same question, maybe. Maybe that would help.
Uh, what do you think?
What do I think? Okay. So, yeah, no, it is hard, but I think let's say I can remember, like, say, a conversation with my mother where we were discussing about something, and I can think that, oh, maybe that, maybe she said something that unsettled me. I can't like remember, like, yeah, right now I can't remember the details. So, um, I think if it's really bothering, because I tend to do a lot of this work of closing loops a lot of the time anyway. So I think like a lot of time the things won't actually come up for me because I kind of do deal with them as I go along.
Mm.
Um, but maybe yeah. So actually, let's think about one where, like a friend of mine. where we had a bit of a discussion, but I never felt like I really understood the sort of the end of the discussion. Um, and I never really got the answer that I was kind of looking for.
Mm.
Um, and so that felt like a sort of an open loop. That felt like I kind of feel like there's still something left to be said.
Mhm.
And these opening closing loops, you can see like people use, I don't know if we talked about it last time, but like people use it in marketing, YouTube video titles use it all the time. It's like, this, or newspapers, everyone uses it because we're curious creatures who want to close off these open loops. Um, and you see a headline, it says, oh God, I can't even think of like a good article name at the moment, but like these 3 ways are going to the must-have for losing weight or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm curious now. I want to know how to lose weight. What are the 3 things? And so our brain instantly wants to go into resolution mode
Mm.
because we naturally want to close these gaps. And I think when we leave these gaps open, when we don't find the answer to these things, it's when it becomes sort of almost painful so with a small thing, so with a small argument with someone, small something, or like I said, the title of a thing, you end up with this little bit of discomfort.
Mm.
But when it becomes something that's bigger, so like a bigger loss, more grief, more things, um, and before you've got to a point normally of like, let's say just going, oh, well, I'll never know the answer, but it'll just sit in your mind and you
Mm.
never really get that closure you want. But then you relate it to these other losses, these other things that you sort of end up unresolved, 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 and they get bigger, you get bigger ones and bigger ones. And so therefore you end up walking around with all of these unresolved things going around in your head.
Mm.
And I think depending on how we were, um, maybe how we were raised. I don't want to go into sort of all sorts of childhood stuff at the moment, but the experiences that we've gone through life can depend on how many open loops, I guess, we have and how quick or quickly we do or don't resolve them. We should naturally resolve them,
Mm.
but I think what like society is kind of like, whoever's to blame, no idea, but like I think there's a sort of social when we don't talk about grief and when we don't talk about these things and we don't talk about loss. Um, and that's definitely one I want to talk about in another episode about like why we don't talk about grief.
Mm.
We end up not naturally being able to close these gaps like we should normally naturally do. Because I always say that like mourning and grief is a natural process, as natural as living. And you're obviously going to be extremely upset and sad and more, in mourning. And we should naturally close off that loop eventually. But for the fact that I felt like I grieved for 10 years, I was not closing any loops. I didn't feel like I was finding any closure. And so I know if this goes unresolved, at least for me, like, and I know for many other people, actually, from all the reading and research I've done, that that like, yeah, you can keep these open loops for a long time. And that's essentially what happens with trauma.
Mm.
Big or little trauma, you end up with this loop that's never closed for potentially a lifetime if it's never resolved in any way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
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 I find this fascinating, and I think when I realized this and I found out about this, for me it just made so much sense. Again, it's about this like uh finishing communications or having these communications and stuff. Finding ways to kind of close these loops and finish these communications that we might have had with people who are no longer around, either living or dead. So we might have lost someone to death, but we might also just lost someone from our life, and that's still a loss.
Mm.
And so we have not been able to close that loop. We haven't found closure for that thing. Um, and it sounds like something that's a bit far-fetched, like how do I find closure? And again, this is why I did this online course where I help people one-to-one or however you need help. um Little dog is just dreaming and making little squeaky sounds. Yeah, because I wanted to get the information out there. Because I think it's so important. I feel like it's something that everyone should be able to know and do
Mm.
all the time.
Yeah.
and these methods for finding these it's about communication. And again, I want to talk more, and we're going to talk about communication more in another episode anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is about communication. What happened to your other mug?
I was already using this one, so I didn't
Oh,
want to.
okay. Oh, I see. I was like, I made you tea in a different mug.
I'm
And I was
saving
like,
washing up.
I yeah, I think it's so important because I think this is the basis of like why we always suffer from central traumas and things. And I've realized I have so many more, like whether you want to call it traumas, I don't know, but these events that are sort of stuck and going around in my mind, I've had so many of them. Like more, there's more coming up for me as I do more healing work. There's more coming up for me,
Mm.
and I'm feeling more and more and more able to emotionally regulate. It's
Mm.
like a way. It's. I mean, I literally can't get to like. It saddens me so much that I lived like that for so long,
Mm.
and it saddens me that there's probably like I don't know millions of people also experiencing the same thing
Mm.
where they're not able to get over their trauma and stuff. One, because trauma is hard to deal with, right?
Mm.
Incredibly difficult. It's hard to approach it, and this is why I sort of made like I developed like with the like kind of like tweaked it a bit, so developed a technique that allows you to kind of start chipping away at the trauma. And this is the way I've managed to do it because I also had too many people to talk to and too many people to communicate with that it felt like onerous to try and like I didn't know who to talk to first. I didn't know, yeah, and it was really difficult for me to really even just dive in and just
Mm.
be like, right, I'm just going to start hard and start talking to the people who I really, really need to talk to first, because actually that was almost um harder.
Mm.
And so I chose to, so I've been dipping in and out of talking to some that are harder and easier, some that are more recent, some that are more in the past.
Mm.
Um, all over my life, I've pinpointed like people and communications that need to be had to close these loops off for me. And I feel like I'm having that freedom of mind. I'm having that emotional regulation. I'm not thinking about something and turning to tears all of the time about something that
Mm.
I would have normally done so. And then I've got other stuff coming up for me, and I'm like, okay, I need to deal with that. And
Mm.
I'm able to recognize the stuff I need to deal with.
Mm.
I know you've been on the other side of this as I've been,
Very
ex
much so. Yeah.
been experiencing it. And it's been a hard journey in a lot of ways. Obviously, like healing from emotional dysfunction for like a long time
Mm.
there has been a lot of healing that's needed to happen.
Mm.
Um, but I think it's so important because I think there's so much light on the other side. Uh, I mean, I don't know if you notice like some things that would have normally upset me just don't upset me anymore.
Oh yeah, a lot of things, I
It's
think.
really weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Without going into too much detail, obviously, about some personal things, but um,
Mm.
yeah, it's a little bit strange. It kind of you're having a conversation about something, and you're like, hang on a minute, I don't have the same weirdly negative emotions I had about that.
Yeah.
But you might notice like some other emotions that come up for you about something else, and you're like, okay, I now know I need to redirect my energy at focusing on that thing.
Mm.
Um, and I think like this is always something that's really bothered me. I feel like I could almost get both an ADHD and an autistic diagnosis, but I'm not enough of either to to warrant being able to have either diagnosis. I feel
Mm.
like I sort of have always sat in somewhere in the middle. And I think this is what made things difficult for me because um I feel like it would have explained a lot of things, but at the same time, I feel like recognizing that a lot of what I've been through is trauma based. And I think my chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis has been helpful because what was it, a year ago? Um, it was, was it on the new? Well, it was like a year ago I found out it was trauma related. I think it was either it was like the first time I knew about that. And I didn't realize I don't even think I realized I had any trauma particularly because
Mm.
it's all I would have classed as little t traumas. It's all just like You know, I didn't quite make friends very easily.
Mm.
I didn't have a good social network. I felt very alone a lot of the time. I've had depression and anxiety, you know, things I kind of thought was normal.
Yeah.
But I think when you're, and then obviously when my friend died, I thought that grieving is normal. You know, you just think, well, this is just how I am. I didn't think that I should be feeling any better
Yeah.
necessarily. Um, no one taught me otherwise. No one taught me, or said anything where. And I think this again why I want to get this information out there. It's just like you don't have to be feeling that way if you choose not to. But I thought it was normal.
Mm.
I mean, how bonkers is that? But
It's the way you grow up understanding everything, or how people are showing you, or how people are just getting on. That's how you
yeah,
perceive things. I did that for a very long time. So
yeah, you just kind of explain stuff away, don't you?
yeah.
We've been talking about that, haven't we, recently about intellectualizing and explaining stuff away.
Mm.
So you might be emotionally pained at something, but our, you know, we've got like, you know, without sounding too much like a doctor, like we've got like our lymphatic system, you know, our nervous system, and we've got our like, you know, our thinking brain, intellectual brain is a sort of, they are basically connected, but obviously I feel like it almost feels like you've got two voices in your head,
Mm.
unless that's just me and I.
My other voice is you, to be honest. So
But yeah, so it feels like you've got like an intellectual brain kind of saying one thing, and then your emotional brain is trying to tell you something else. And um, for an incredibly long time, I always listened to the intellectual brain, shoved and intellectualized my emotions away,
mm.
and just said, "This is how I should be feeling. This is just how I'm feeling. Okay, I'm just gonna somehow survive, and this will be, I'll, you know."
Mm.
And this is me in like massive emotional pain, physical pain.
Mm.
For most of my life, I had back pain, joint pain. You know, I was sleeping for 10 hours a day and still waking up exhausted.
Mm.
Um, all sorts of things. I just felt like haunted on a daily basis. And I thought I had no trauma, right? I feel like I thought this was normal, and I felt like I had um, no trauma until I started genuinely describing living as feeling traumatic. And I was
Mm.
like, wait, that does, if living for me feels traumatic, maybe it is. Maybe I have been through trauma. And I started doing more research and reading around trauma and understanding, and I was like, wow, actually, I think I have a lot more trauma than I even realized.
Mm.
And again, it's like it's little things. It's like being bullied at school. Again, like my friends not listening to me, being bullied at work, you know, being not listened to, not being validated at work by your by people, and your work not being validated.
Yeah.
Um, you know, things that for me felt minor at the time, sort of. Not that they were minor. Um, they didn't feel minor to me. I think I got to a point where I was sort of like, I can't, this doesn't feel right anymore. I
Mm.
think when I started to learn more and more about it, well, I think after the third time I got made redundant, and I was like, right, I'm leaving.
Yeah, it kind of hit a brick wall at that point, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I was like, and this is before I met you as well. So, um, and I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done. Let's go and try a different career. I was like, I'll do anything but this career. And you could describe that as burnout. I think a lot of people do.
Mm.
But I kind of more relate it to like, it felt traumatic,
Mm.
if that's the right word to use. And I think like semantics and words and things, you know, it's very difficult to sometimes have a conversation about certain terms because we all have a certain idea about what the terms mean and things like
Mm.
that. So sometimes I really find that's very difficult, and caveating the hell out of certain words is difficult. And that's why like people use, I think, big T trauma and little T trauma and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, um, but yeah, I think like this is why I think healing for me has been so important. I think um, I just didn't think it was useful living in a way that was emotionally destroying me.
Mm.
Whether I knew how to get out of it or not at the time, I think slowly I was like, right, I need to change. I need to do something. Like my body was screaming at me to do something about it. I just
Mm.
was not listening for a long time, really not listening.
Mm.
And then like the amount of changes, I sometimes don't even appreciate how much I've changed and how much more positive. Like, because I still have up and down days.
Mm.
But I used to have all down days all the time.
Mm.
Um, and now at least I have 70% up days.
Yeah.
That's a fun 70% increase is extraordinary.
Yeah.
If you think about it that way.
Compared to what it was, yeah.
Yeah, I literally like was not having a good day every day of my life. Um, I know, yeah, I sometimes question how I managed to do that for so long, but it was crazy. I think it's like luckily my trauma wasn't anything that I felt was significant, which is a bit weird because I think it is significant. But I think there are people who are also dealing with a lot worse as well. So it's kind of I suffered from maybe emotional neglect. I didn't suffer from necessarily emotional abuse like
Mm.
some people do. And again, the fine lines between the definitions I think can be, difficult. And I think like no one should ever compare, but like no one should ever compare their grief. No one should ever compare their trauma. But it's like if this sort of method works for someone like me, hopefully it can help people who are, if they want to, not be in this pain for so long, then maybe it can help. And also I reflect on the fact that like I've been opening these loops for forever.
Mm.
It was not even just as my friend died, it was before that. Because I liken it to sort of starting around sort of late teenage years. I seemed like after my childhood, um, I don't know, at least that's what I remember. It's like when I was a teenager, I just found it really hard.
Mm.
And as I grew up, I think it was like, boyfriends, emotions, hormones and stuff. It was just like having independence. It was all kind of too much. I
Mm.
think I just suffered from overwhelm and it just kept going. The
Yeah.
overwhelm kept
Yeah.
expanding and stuff.
You doing good?
What about you? How going to sort all your traumas? What are we going to do to you?
Have a lot more podcasts.
Oh, have a lot more podcasts. Yeah, maybe by the end of
I've got
it.
plenty of trauma that probably still needs looking at, actually.
Yeah, I know. I always say like we go on our own emotional sort of healing journey, and I think, and you started using this method recently, haven't you?
Mm.
And how
Yeah.
have you been feeling about it?
Feel better. Obviously, there's still a lot of, I need to probably repeat it a few times for the same method, for the same reasons, but it helps. Helps me feel a bit better, but obviously it's just going to take time for it to fully heal. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, absolutely takes time, but from the experience you've had so far with it, what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely something that that can be used to help.
Are you surprised at the results so
Yes.
far? It's amazing, isn't it? You don't really expect it to have
No.
kind of and I was surprised when and again I've got this online course or we can do it one-on-one together. So if you're wondering what we're talking about, then I've done a whole online course to explain the whole closing.
Open and closing.
No, what do you call it?
Brief.
Finding
Finding closure.
finding closure method. Can't even remember my own thing. Um, yeah, maybe just sort of describe that a little bit, like what that relief feels like, or what.
It makes you feel or slightly understand. Uh, I don't know how to put it because obviously you're trying to. I don't know how much information I can probably give out without
No,
it.
no, no. I mean,
But
talk about it freely.
obviously you.
I mean, it might just be confusing because we've not gone into context about it, and the course goes into detail. But like,
Yeah, you forget you're basically forgiving that part of the experience in terms of how it made you feel and trying to help you move on emotionally and not hold a grudge against it, so to speak. And obviously
funny.
and obviously forgiving it kind of takes some most of the bad feelings away. The more you do it, the more it feels more at ease, but it's a big step in your recovery, it's just going to take time for it to take full effect, I think.
Yeah, I reflect on the fact that you could do it quicker,
Mm,
but sometimes it just, I always sort of think like approach it when it feels like it comes to you, and especially if it's more traumatic, like for the really traumatic events, I feel like,
mm,
pacing yourself is no bad thing. And again, it's like I said, it's like emotional healing you can do in weeks rather than years. I mean, if you
yeah.
or months, or it's something that will take you a far less, short time, or at least something that, I mean, for 10 years, I mean, I don't even, I can't even express how frustrating it sort of feels that I was in that place for so long.
Mm,
I literally, I didn't spend that 10 years just grieving. I was
mm,
trying to find so many different ways to help myself. I started on um supplements, and I tried to do exercise. um I What else did I do? I changed my diet.
mm,
um all sorts of things. I just tried. I mean, this is obviously me also trying to get over my chronic fatigue syndrome as
mm,
well. And I was trying desperately to try and do anything I could to heal.
mm,
Anything. Had therapy. I talked about these sorts of things in the last episode about like I had therapy and counseling,
mm,
CBT. Um, I really, really wanted to heal. I
mm,
really, really wanted that pain to go away. I went to the doctors with so much pain, so much like chronic back pain, chronic everything.
mm,
And I think it's all this fact that this trauma was like sitting in my body for so long and just compounding over the years.
mm,
Oh, and it's just it's hard to think that that's like I have no regrets about where I'm up to because
mm,
I think I'm in a far better place. And and this is why I have no regrets doing this information and giving this information out, because I think
mm,
it's it's so important to help people be seen and be heard, and like like we're just suffering from this sort of thing and not understanding it at all.
mm,
There's actually so much information out there that, but because like doctors aren't like coming to us and telling us what's wrong, or aren't able, it's hard for us to all kind of find this information. We got the internet that's exploded 30 odd, what's probably like 40 odd, I don't even know where we're up to, 30 odd years ago.
yeah.
In our lifetime, pretty much.
Mm,
That's exploded with information. There's so much more information out there. I think it's amazing. I don't think I would have been able to do the research and the stuff and the information I would have gained
mm,
without it. And the
mm,
books and everything I've read, some fantastic things that I've all just been like piecing it all together, and I've been like, wow, this big picture of like, wow, I can truly help myself and heal myself. And I can share this information in a kind of a nicer package than the three odd years I spent trying to find all the, well, I guess longer than that, but primarily I think a lot of the sort of information I found has been sort of more 3 4 years or something
mm,
like
yeah.
that. But yeah, I mean, I've been trying to heal for a long time. I think like
Mm,
it just I just didn't want to give up. I just
yeah.
was like determined to not be living this same way
Yeah.
forever. And I think I'm not someone who is um, wanting to rush around and do loads of stuff all the time. I feel like I've just found like a nice steady pace in life. I've managed to get some hobbies back in my life.
Mm,
Um, and sort of found like a balance. I think that took me so long, especially because, and maybe this is a complete episode for a different one, because obviously I also thought I should be in this pain and this was all normal. I was also meeting people who were no good for me, um, or I didn't recognize that there was any flaws in the friendships or the relationships or anything. I just saw them as what they were intellectually, and avoided and ignored all of the emotional pain that they caused me because I didn't know any better. And I think
mm,
that's a huge part of like recognizing self-worth and self-value and all sorts of things, but also just recognizing that the pain is not normal.
yeah.
The pain doesn't need to be normal.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just a bit conscious of time. I don't know if we want us to wrap it up at all.
let's wrap it up. Yeah, have you got any sort of like closing off statements or comments or like things for me? Or you know, if you want to share an anecdote from yourself.
I mean, it's more for the viewers. I think you should. I think this is something good to try the process and what we've just been talking about. And obviously, it can be discussed more in future podcasts. Or if you looked at Pip's what was it called? Grief
Finding closure.
Finding Closure.
My finding closure course.
Yeah,
I made the course to make it more accessible to people. That was the whole point of making like an online recorded course. And you know, yeah, that's what you mean, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But apart from that, I think you kind of uh noted everything that was needed. I can't think of anything extra to add specifically, but yeah, trauma is can be hidden, but it's trying to bring it out and trying to find it and
You mean heal from it? I
heal
hope.
heal from it, heal
You
from it.
mean
Yeah,
don't just like dig it up and be like, la, 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 here you go, here's all your trauma. No,
mentally
that's
find
like,
it and heal from it. Yeah,
yeah, it's more like closing those loops.
yeah,
And I think this is so important. I think like, yeah, we'll end on that point. It's like it's not about bringing up the loops again and again and again. I think trauma, especially trauma, is one of those things that you really don't want to be reliving. You do not want to talk about it in a sense that you're bringing it up and just leaving those loops open and open. That's how I felt therapy was what it was doing for me. It was just keeping these loops open with no closing of these loops.
yeah,
And I think that's where with trauma especially, those closing those loops are so important to not just like open up the wounds and then just leave them just there. Like you want to close them off, and I think that is so important for emotional healing. Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah, so I think we'll end on that note because I think that's a good place to end. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hopefully we're going to be making more. We definitely like weren't even sure. No, we were going to make more. Definitely going to make more. But yeah, I think yeah, get in touch via my email. I think it should be on my profile, or you can put a comment on this if you can't find it. But yeah, if you're interested in the online course or anything, then let me know. Or if you want to work one-on-one as well. But yeah, I think like hopefully we'll be talking more about like, you know, it's just amazing the results you can get from this sort of thing. And I think until I experienced it, I to be honest, I wasn't skeptical. When I found like all the information I found, it just gets more and more like piecing together, and I was just like, it's all is starting to make sense. I don't think I've ever really been skeptical of the sort of the stuff I've found. Sometimes it's just not been as easy to access. But I think when I think they teach you at school, it's like uh read around the subject, get three resources. And more of I just read about this stuff and understand it. Um it's just more and more fall into place, and I feel like I have such an understanding about it, and from my own experience of my own recovery, I'm just like, this just is so worthwhile for so many people. So yeah, if you're interested, then yeah, let me know. um so that's been the end of this episode.
One of many.
One of many. Yeah, we will see you in the next episode, and if you want to subscribe or any of those things that are all completely normal for like these channels, then do that. No advocates for subscribing. I didn't subscribe to loads of things in the past, but actually I see the appeal of it these days. But like subscribe if you want to. So great, amazing.
Bye.